Okay, we're going to get ready to get started. We may have you having a few more people join us along the way, but I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Tracy Hudson, Leadership Specialist at the University of Delaware. And I'm so excited to have you here today for our webinar, Rethinking the Role of School Leadership to Support Student Teachers. And we have two parts to this webinar. And so today is part one. So I hope you register for both. If not, maybe you'll want to register for both at the end. I'm going to introduce, I know Elizabeth and Monique will be able to tell you more about themselves, and you can see them on the screen. I'm going to introduce them, and I will spotlight them for you as well, so that make sure that you can see them as we're talking today. But Dr. Elizabeth Sulfa is an associate professor in the School of Education. She identifies as a secular Jewish humanist, and she focuses her teaching, research, and service efforts on the Jewish ideas of tzedakah, which is justice, and tikkun olam, repair the world. Her research focuses on experiential learning opportunities within field-based coursework. Elizabeth seeks to explore teaching practices that contribute to context for learning where all education stakeholders can flourish. Elizabeth has recently published the Comprehensive Guide for Working with Student Teachers, Tools and Templates to Support Reflective Professional Growth. And that's Monique and Elizabeth worked on this book together, and they're going to be sharing this information with you, some of this information with you today. Other work has appeared in outlets such as the Journal of Teacher Education, Teaching and Teaching Education, Action and Teachers College Press. She also serves as a reviewer for numerous journals and is a longtime board member of the Philadelphia-based nonprofit Need Indeed. Her clinical work includes providing field instruction for teacher candidates placed in Wilmington City Public Schools and teaching graduate and undergraduate courses in reflection, equity, and action research methods. Elizabeth's other important work is serving as a proud mother of the hilarious and creative Harry Counter. It makes me want to meet him, Elizabeth. And she is a dedicated partner to Chris Counter. Before pursuing her PhD, Elizabeth taught middle school in the Philadelphia School District. So we're so glad to have Elizabeth here today. And she's joined by Monique Alexander. Monique Alexander is an assistant professor of elementary and early childhood education in the College of Education. She has been a professor at Slippery Rock since 2017. Dr. Alexander also serves as the faculty co-chair for the President's Commission on Race and Ethnic Diversity, whose mission is to advocate for students of color and other marginalized identities in ways that create Venture Slippery Rock as an inclusive space for their educational journey. Dr. Alexander is committed to ensuring that students of color, particularly students who are developing expertise as teachers, have access to mentorship and enrichment opportunities that will impact their future teaching careers. Outside of teaching, Dr. Alexander has dedicated her research agenda to studying the experiences of students of color and teaching education programs at predominantly white institutions and advocating for large-scale curricular changes and teacher education programs across the country to focus on anti-racist teaching, as well as culturally relevant sustaining pedagogies for future teachers. Dr. Alexander is a wife and mom of two beautiful children, Richard 10, Ruby 6, and the wife of Richard Alexander, associate head coach of track and field and cross country at Bucknell University. So welcome, Monique and Elizabeth. We're so glad to have you here today. And I'm going to put, as they start, I'm going to put the PDF of their presentation in the chat so that you will have that. And we are also recording this, and you will receive the recording, and it'll be on the DASL website. So thank you, Elizabeth and Monique.
Thank you for that introduction, Tracy. That was really generous of you. Lovely to hear nice things about yourself.
I like doing more.
I have up on the slide right now the book that Monique and I recently published. It came out in February that much of this presentation today is based on. And you can access this book either through Amazon or Teachers College Press. All right, so as Tracy said, my name is Elizabeth Soslow, and I'm an associate professor at UD. And I teach across multiple teacher prep programs, the doctoral, master's, and undergraduate level. But my very favorite part of my job is working with teacher candidates in the field. And both Mo and I are really excited to be with you today and talk about how you can strengthen the teacher pipeline in your own school or district or state by creating enriching experiences for the teacher candidates placed in your school's district or state. So whether you're a representative from DOE, I see we have Rob Gray there, or a district level administrator or a school-based leader or a faculty member in higher ed, we hope that you'll find the information we share today helpful. We're planning on talking about 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have time at the end for questions.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here today. Again, my name is Monique Alexander. I'm assistant professor at Slippery Rock. And like Elizabeth, I wear a lot of hats, and obviously one of my favorites is supporting teacher candidates through their clinical field experiences. And again, we're so thankful that you're here today and that you are demonstrating your commitment to the professional development and mentorship of our future teachers. So let's get started. As the matriculation of teachers throughout the teacher pipeline decreases, we can project the implications of this growing teacher shortage. And all of you as school leaders want to address this shortage as to make sure you are providing high quality teachers for your students in the future. You do have the ability to impact the number of spots on the pipeline. And most often your work is visible when you either inspire your students to pursue careers in the field of education, or you're providing professional development opportunities for your in-service teachers so that you can increase retention. But today we want to focus on a spot in the pipeline that's a little bit hidden, and that is within the student teaching experience. Kate Walsh, the president of the National Council of Teacher Quality, wrote in her most recent educational leadership article that school districts need to make student teaching much more than an afterthought. Improving student teaching arrangements is the highest impact, most cost-effective way to improve the teacher pipeline. By better leveraging the student teaching process, school leaders can reduce costs and improve their talent pipeline. And anytime someone mentions cost-saving initiatives, you fiscally responsible school leaders and administrators are looking forward to taking action and listening to how you can be a part of that process. So I'm sure you're asking yourself, isn't student teaching really the main responsibility of the university? Why do I have to be involved in this? And essentially, yes, a large percentage of the responsibility for student teaching rests within the university confines. We are the grantor of the licensure, and we make sure that together with our departments of education that the candidates are ready to teach. And so commonly what we see is this huge focus on the student teaching triad, the clinical educator, the university liaison, all there to support the teacher candidate. You can go to the next. But as important as the triad is, and there's a ton of research that only focuses on the triad, there are models that we can draw from that demonstrate how important the environment that the teaching triad is in, and how that also influences the student teaching process. So we are drawing from Bronfenbrenner's ecological model of development, and that reminds us that children grow up with immediate, intermediate, and these distant spheres of influence that can impact them throughout their lives, such as their parents, their church, or generational trends like having mobile devices for, as they were born. And similarly, our student teaching experience also is situated within these different spheres of influence. And so their immediate sphere is most likely the triad with the university supervisor and the clinical educator. But the intermediate and distant influences also impact the student teaching experience. So when we look at the positioning of school leaders' impact on the pipeline, I'm specifically thinking about this framework in the school placement, we have a more nuanced understanding of the scale that your impact can have on the teacher candidates and their professional development. And so what we'd like to do today is to more clearly define the role of the school administrator in creating those enriching practicum experience for our teacher candidates. And we want to give you kind of an idea of where school administrators can have a huge impact on the quality of the practicum experience for both the teacher candidate and the clinical educator. And so we have three main goals that we'd like to achieve today in this webinar. The first is to help you spot teachers in your building that fit the profile of what we're calling a best fit clinical educator, as in to make sure that the clinical educators in your building are able to impact the pipeline. Second, we will provide excerpts from our text on the role of school administrators in orienting teacher candidates to the norms, values, and expectations of the building, and how valuable building that type of community is to the retention of your teacher candidates. And lastly, we'll discuss the role of school administrators in building relationships with the teacher candidate, individual relationships with the teacher candidate, and also how the candidate serves as a space for professional development for other teachers in your building. So while we want to believe that all of our teachers have the skills and the dispositions to mentor teacher candidates, we just know that some are much better at this than others. And we also know that there is so much time and devastation and heartbreak and awkwardness that comes when we have to find new placements for teacher candidates because the triad went sour. And while we can't prevent all the breakups that might happen, we do believe that there are some ways that we can spot strong clinical educators to serve in the capacity and reduce the likelihood that the dyads won't make it. And so we want to offer a few tangible characteristics that exceptional clinical educators share so that we can support you to select teacher leaders for this responsibility. The first question we always ask is tenure really enough? Most states and universities and districts have minimum qualifications to make clinical educators eligible to host teacher candidates. And so I think the premise is that a teacher who reaches the mark of tenure is prepared to host a candidate. And we might want to spend some time questioning and examining this position very critically. When tenure is a starting point, it does help our novice teachers not host teacher candidates, and it prevents them from burnout and overload. However, we also have to think about the other qualifications that may come with that 3-year or 5-year tenure label that should impact our decision to have our clinical educators host teacher candidates. In our opinion, the most valuable characteristic that a clinical educator can have is the disposition to question everything and remain curious, even when the ideas and practices that they have been doing for such a long time have been effective. Julia Galef calls this the scout mindset. I love this idea of kind of thinking of outside the box and understanding how we can question all of the things that we see that we think are real and objective in this world. She describes scout mindset as the motivation to see things as they are and not as you wish they were. Being or trying to be intellectually honest, objective, or fair-minded, and curious about what's actually true. So this curiosity, this objectivity, and this honesty as a characteristic of best fit clinical educators means that they're always looking to gather evidence that validate their teaching practices and decision-making, And they're also willing to question their pedagogy with the teacher candidate. This scout mindset disposition also comes with a wide variety of skills that we want the clinical educator to be able to model for the teacher candidate. So for example, clinical educators who might have a scout mindset are also able to build inquiry investigations. They know how to question. They know how to find research to support or debunk a particular practice. They know how to collect data, and they're often able to make revisions to their practice that are tied directly to student learning. And so clinical educators with these inquiry skills are also able to provide feedback to the teacher candidates in the classroom setting that's objective and useful to the development of their practice. Another disposition that we hope clinical educators have is this asset framing disposition. We find that when we talk about an asset framing disposition, we're looking to see a clinical educator that has the ability to see the strengths and the ways in which students, families, and communities bring the education or bring their context and their knowledge into the classroom. We don't want people to think about asset framing as this oversimplification of optimism or inordinate positivity, but instead, we want teachers to be thinking about asset framing as an intentional use of culturally relevant teaching in the classroom, where we're really drawing from what our students and our families and our communities have instead of what they don't have. So instead of hearing the teacher say, our kids can't do homework at home, asset framing clinical educators will instead say, doing homework at home is not a realistic expectation for our families, so we will find another way to give students extra reps with the material. We find that clinical educators who approach their practice from an asset framing mindset or disposition are more likely to pass those dispositions on to their teacher candidates. In such, the teacher candidate learns to be empowered by the possibility and the prospect of influencing teacher learning or student learning by looking for how the home, school, and community connection can be fortified. The student teaching practicum is such a crucial time to set these expectations for the opposition to derogatory or deficit-minding language that we sometimes hear teachers use in discussions of our students. Another disposition that we value very heavily in the development of our teacher candidates is this idea of collaboration, right? Where the clinical educator is a beautiful co-teaching partner and also sees themselves as a co-learner. Clinical educators who are collaborative and you see that they work well in your building with other teachers or maybe even organizations outside of the building where they have longstanding and trusting relationships with, these are the ones that will be more apt for co-teaching and co-learning as clinical educators. So in their classrooms, the clinical educator will find the value in sharing decision-making with the teacher candidate and intentionally making space for the teacher candidate to practice their craft without the fear of the clinical educator jumping in or saving the day or, just really taking over. We know that our teacher candidates need the space to make mistakes. And if we have clinical educators that are not interested in co-teaching or co-learning, we cannot, in fact, know if the student teacher is going to make it or not. As such, I think we believe that clinical educators who make space or can step back to let the teacher candidate do what they need to do are optimal clinical educators for our teacher candidates. Thank you for advancing. There are notes on a different page. All right, so lastly, right, when we're thinking about characteristics of clinical educators that we want them to have, we also have to be super cautious and think about characteristics that we really want to avoid. And we're calling these characteristics red flags. So there are 3 red flags that Elizabeth and I have seen a number of times, and at this point know that this is not a useful professional development space for a teacher candidate. The first is silo teachers. When we look to encourage teacher candidates to see the school community as a space for resources and professional development and community, we want to be cautious of assigning teacher candidates to teachers who are lone rangers. You'll see these teachers who are a part of the team, but maybe are always on the outside of the team, who do not engage in collaborative work across the building, or just, kind of stick to themselves. Maybe they always eat lunch by themselves, or they don't use the teacher's lounge, and not because they're introverted, but because they are seeing their practice as one that is detached from the rest of the community. Our teacher candidates need the opportunity to interact with and gain knowledge from and experience from a wide variety of teaching practices and environments. And so siloed teachers often block that opportunity for them. The second red flag we see is called hashtag sad space, because we are really trying to steer our candidates away from being hosted by deficit-minded teachers. Deficit-minded teachers are the exact opposite of our asset framing teachers. And they really don't have the ability to recognize the contextual barriers to student achievement. And they also do not see themselves as responsible for being a part of the solution to improving student learning. And so what we will hear them say is that they have tried everything and it hasn't worked. And so they may not be up to trying new things. And as such, they might blame the lack of student learning or student growth on the students instead of finding responsible ways to impact student learning. We really need our teacher candidates to have an environment that will encourage them to be drivers of change and to see themselves as innovative and making a contribution to changing the teaching profession. So teachers with a deficit mindset will not have the ability to provide an innovative inquiry-based and learning environment for our candidates. Lastly, we really would like to caution everyone from selecting clinical educators that display a soldier mindset, which is the counterpart of the scout mindset. So teachers coming from a soldier mindset have no interest in questioning their practice, soliciting evidence to prove their impact on student learning, or even using logic to support the execution of their teaching practices. And so they're kind of set in their ways, have kind of a my way or the highway style of mentorship. And so clinical educators operating from this soldier mindset are not ideal for hosting teacher candidates. We really need to encourage the development of teachers as researchers, people who collect data and use the data to make those informed decisions and innovations. And so clinical educators with a soldier mindset will not be able to create a learning environment where they're actually seeking to prove that what they are doing are effective teaching practices.
Thank you so much, Monique, for kicking us off and giving these really important insights into how to find the best clinical educators to work with our candidates in the field. So after selecting these excellent clinical educators, the next step is making sure that the candidates are welcomed into the school community. We know that administrators and members of the school leadership team are ambassadors for the school community, and they are the person that communicates to candidates as the ultimate authority. So while we know it's highly unlikely that principals will have daily or even weekly contact with candidates, it would be incredibly useful if principals or other school leaders would lead a brief welcome orientation for candidates at the beginning of each semester. So these are different than the district level orientations. These are specific to the school placement site for the candidate. So during this orientation, administrators will want to explain kind of the nuts and bolts. Things like where to park, how to access the building, signing in, signing out, physical identification requirements. The principals we've worked with also find it useful to share codes of conduct or staff manuals with candidates. As I'm sure is no surprise to you, our candidates are typically very anxious when they begin their placements, and our candidates routinely report that principals who take these steps really set them at ease. They find it very helpful, and they appreciate having time to ask questions at the start of their experience. It's also important that candidates understand the instructional modalities for the school or that the district uses. So this is particularly germane now with the COVID-19. So is the school functioning online? Are they face-to-face? Is there a hybrid option? Relatedly, candidates need access to instructional tools and teaching resources. Monique and I have worked with numerous candidates who could not access the school Wi-Fi, couldn't get a copy of the teacher's manuals or guides or other necessary curricular material. And this is through no fault of the district or the school. These are just some barriers that we see take place between the university and the school kind of divide. While it may not be possible to give a candidate a full set of teacher guides, it would be really useful to have a resource room or a lending library or other distribution approaches to ensure that candidates can adequately plan and execute their lessons. Much of what we shared so far is obviously expanded on in the book that we just published. But the next set of ideas I'm going to share with you will start to help persuade your candidates that they are teaching in a vibrant school community with rich resources, both within the school and the community the school serves. And now we start to try to bring them into the longer pipeline beyond pre-service education and into in-service practice. So in our text, we suggest an activity that involves the candidates becoming more familiar with school community resources. And the purpose of this community activity described in our book is having the candidates become familiar with the neighborhood in which the community is situated or the neighborhood in which the community serves. So first, candidates are instructed to locate 3 websites that host local news and community events. Then the candidates create a list of community events that are going to occur during the early portion of their field placements. These events might be held at churches, community centers, local parks. The candidate then brings their list of events to their clinical educator and asks for feedback about which of the events would be most appropriate for them to attend. And the candidate ultimately selects 1 or 2 events to attend. We found that candidates often use their experiences from these community events to enhance their own lesson plans and improve the relevancy of their instruction. So for example, there's a really popular research study that explored something called Pentecostal Pedagogy. In Indiana, candidates from Ball State University actually attended church with their pupils and found that the students were highly engaged in call response patterns. So candidates began to bring that back into their own classrooms and incorporated call response strategies in their instruction, and they saw engagement rates rise through the roof. The other activity from the book is focused on the actual school community within the confines of the building. So in this activity, candidates gather names, roles, locations, and contact details for the people in their school, from administrators to gatekeepers, such as the front office staff, cafeteria workers, maintenance workers, and so on. It's really essential that candidates begin to feel like a fully integrated member of the school community, and knowing all the adults across the spectrum in the school is very helpful. Finally, we want to turn our principals and school leaders' ideas about their explicit role as mentors. A lot of principals we work with don't see themselves as direct mentors of the candidates. They see that as the role as a classroom teacher serving as a clinical educator. But we've had a ton of success with principals who do take this up and use observations and instructional walkthroughs to identify candidates for their own future hiring efforts. Just in the past year, 3 of my candidates were offered positions by the principal in their placement site. While some principals might have time for a full lesson observation, other administrators may only have time for a brief stop-in or an instructional walkthrough. So in our book, we provide examples and templates for what we call tier 1, 2, and 3 tools. With each tier, the observer, in this case, we're talking about a school principal or leadership team member, but it could be the clinical educator. The observer focuses on gathering evidence of pupil learning and is able to leave behind a written document that communicates to the teacher candidate some points of pride and areas for improvement. Some templates and examples we include in our text include the pupil competency checklist, learning snapshots, a technique called selective verbatim, content charting, and traveling maps, just to name a few. So these observation feedback tools can become actual portfolio pieces for candidates as well. So in addition to observation feedback, some administrators opt to write letters of recommendation. These recommendations can obviously support a district pipeline if they're writing a recommendation for a different position, as a teaching position in the candidate certification area might not be readily available in their particular school site. There might be a neighboring school, obviously, in the district that is the absolute perfect fit. Finally, we have principals and school leaders who conduct mock interviews, and we've seen this both in the field with school placement, and we've been very fortunate enough to have some principals come, particularly out to the University of Delaware, and conduct these mock interviews with our candidates. And these mock interviews function to both determine if they themselves want to hire a candidate, or if they would recommend a candidate to a colleague, or really just to support candidates in their own professional development. Since it's likely that several candidates will be placed in one school at once, we urge you to consider a highly successful mock interview process that includes a fishbowl approach. So in this approach, an administrator interviews just one candidate, but invites all the other candidates to observe the interview. And then at the end, the candidate observers get to ask questions and dig a little deeper into what the process actually could teach them for their own future interviews. I'm going to move now to staff mentoring approaches. And again, what Monique and I are really trying to impress upon you is that in order to build this pipeline, candidates need to feel a connection beyond just the clinical educator, the mentor teacher hosting them. And there are many, many ways to encourage your staff to get involved with teacher candidates in the building. So the idea here is that you want the candidates to stay at your school as a full-time in-service teacher, and strengthening that potential pipeline will make the candidate feel as if they're supported by your staff beyond that single teacher. For instance, in some schools, an entire grade level team or teachers who teach the same content will team up to support a candidate, inviting that candidate to PLCs, lesson planning meetings, even data analysis sessions, IEP meetings, and so on. We've also found, particularly in schools that are departmentalized, partner teachers will jointly support a single teacher candidate or a pair of candidates. For instance, at Warner Elementary School in the Red Clay District, and I see we have Stacy on, so she knows this goes on over there, the elementary teachers are dedicated to either instructing in math or in English language arts. And so what we do is we place one candidate with the math, one candidate with the English arts teacher, and then the 4 group becomes a full team of support so that our candidates get experiences teaching across content areas. In other schools, it makes sense to have mentoring teams developed based on the actual geographic layout of the school. And I know that there were some schools in the Appoquinimink district that did this a number of years ago. In these instances, regardless of grade level or content, a full floor of teachers will support a candidate. So if the candidate's working maybe on transitioning groups of students throughout the school, perhaps between an instructional period and a lunch period, the floor level teachers will support this transition through a particular hallway. Other floor-based mentoring approaches might include a clinical type of rotation, where a candidate circulates throughout the floor to observe other teachers when their own primary placement classroom is engaged in a non-instructional period, such as during a lunch period. Specialist teachers come into play as well. So specialist teacher mentoring involves the educators in your building who may teach art, music, physical education, and so on. These faculty are incredibly important to the candidate in terms of helping the candidate learn about the various strengths of school children. We all know, and we might even have students like this in our own families, that students might have difficulties in a math class, but they might excel in the art room. These unique skills are really important that we draw out from children that are routinely hidden from the candidate who is relegated only to the core academic classroom. So involving specialists in the mentoring of our candidates opens up communication channels and supports the candidate in understanding the uniqueness and, as Monique talked about, the assets of each child. Finally, don't leave out the non-instructional support staff. For example, encouraging the school nurses, school police, cafeteria aides to communicate with candidates. This can be very fruitful, especially given that our candidates need to take on and understand responsibilities related to securing student safety. So you've listened for quite a while, and you may be thinking at this point, well, what if we do all this and the candidate wants to move back to their hometown? Maybe they're from New York and they don't want to teach in our district or our state. Well, Monique and I have very good news for you. The research tells us that when classroom teachers serve as clinical educators and mentors for teacher candidates, it's the classroom teacher who actually reaps several professional benefits. First, teachers who host candidates report that they learn about new instructional methods from their candidate. Since candidates are current college students, they have ample exposure to cutting-edge instructional approaches. Most recently, our clinical educators have reported that their candidates have exposed them to innovative pedagogical frameworks, such as culturally relevant teaching and restorative justice practices, which has vastly improved both their own teaching and the culture and climate in their classroom and school. Next, our candidates bring instructional technologies to the classroom, and I don't need to remind anyone about COVID-19 and the transition to online learning. But teacher candidates were really instrumental in helping their classroom teachers apply new tech tools. I can't tell you how many times I got a call or a text from a classroom teacher this past semester saying, your candidate just totally saved my life, because they got booted out and the candidate needed to take over. Whether it's creating a Bitmoji classroom, preparing directions for a Flipgrid, or even managing breakout rooms, our candidates were viewed as technology assets. Additionally, since our candidates are trained to ask their clinical educator tons of questions during co-planning sessions, as well as pupil work evaluation sessions, classroom teachers report that the process of slowing down, reflecting on their own justifications and rationales for their decision-making, and then having to articulate their invisible thinking to their candidate has actually improved their own reflective practice. Much of what good teachers do looks like magic to our candidates, or they were born that way. Thus, when our teachers give voice to the complex constellation of thinking that prompts each of their decisions, both the candidate and the classroom teacher can reflect on and interrogate the merit of their decisions based on exploring pupil work products and other pupil data, and then collaboratively planning and enacting adjustments to improve their future instruction. The next benefit's probably really obvious. Adding teacher candidates to the PLC expands the brain power and possibilities of collaboration and sharing of new ideas. We work really hard to train our candidates to become active and contributing members of PLCs. For example, in one of the elementary schools that I worked in, my candidates brought in ideas about developing racial literacy skills through race inquiry groups, and they explored race-based issues in the classroom and with classroom teachers. The teachers found it refreshing and very helpful to explore these issues together in their PLC. Finally, we know that research shows classroom teachers learn a lot by observing the university-based field instructors. So these are folks who come from the university and work with the candidates in the field and conduct post-observation conferences. Though not all field instructors get involved directly with instruction of the classroom pupils, sometimes there are components where the field instructor will co-teach with the candidate as requested and as invited by the classroom teacher. But whether or not the field instructor co-teaches, the classroom teacher still has many opportunities to observe the field instructor guide reflective and evaluative discussions of their candidates' teaching. And classroom teachers report that listening in on these post-observation conferences improves their own skill set as both clinical educators and as reflective practitioners. So before we stop to take your questions, we'd like to leave you with some final thoughts. First, we sincerely hope that we've convinced you that school and district leaders can positively impact the pipeline by welcoming candidates into the school community and engaging them with both instructional and non-instructional staff. The importance of identifying the appropriate clinical educators, as Monique led us through, to support candidate growth and development cannot be overstated. These clinical educators are potentially future colleagues of the candidate, and our candidates would much rather start their first year of teaching by working with collaborative and supportive veteran teachers that they already know. We have had multiple candidates who were completely dedicated to going back to their hometown, and then at the conclusion of their placement, absolutely wanted to stay in the school or the district. And finally, there are reciprocal benefits for everyone. Whether or not our candidates ultimately stay at your placement site, in your school, or in your district as an in-service teacher, the evidence shows that your existing classroom teachers who serve as clinical educators benefit from working as a teacher educator, which provides a sense of professional renewal, may stave off burnout and attrition, and will ultimately result in better context for learning for the pupils in your buildings and your districts. So we now invite you to unmute, put your videos on, ask some questions. We are very excited that we have 14 people on this call on a beautiful summer's day. So thank you for being here. I'm going to switch the question slide just to kind of promote our next talk, which is occurring June 17th, also from 11 to 12. We're going to dive deeper into the power of two and talk more about learning outcomes for both the candidate and the clinical educator and how those learning outcomes can be supported at the school level. So we hope that you'll join us for that. I put the link in the chat to register for that if you haven't done so already. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see each other. I see some smiling faces already. And we'll take your question. We'll do our best to take your questions. We'll listen to them at least. We can't guarantee a great answer, but we'll see what we can do here. Steph. Hi, Steph.
Hi, Elizabeth, and hi, Monique. I'm Steph Koch-Jester, University of Delaware. I don't really have a question. I just want to say, like, this message is so critically important, and I'm so happy to see the 14 people here today listening to this important information. And I really think, I hope you take this out as a roadshow and really reach as many administrators that you can and as many district folks that you can, because this partnership is so critically important. And to hear what we can do to improve the teacher pipeline, support the student teachers as they become novice teachers into practicing teachers in the field, it's so important. So thank you both for this work. My book is on its way. I can't wait to read it, but I really enjoyed today, and it's such a powerful message. So thank you so much for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Steph. That means a lot. And for those of you that don't know Steph, she is the Associate Director for the Elementary Teacher Education Program at the University of Delaware, and she oversees the whole undergraduate teacher prep program. So that means a lot coming from you, Steph. I appreciate it. So you don't all need to say lovely, positive things like Steph. You can ask questions or tell us where we're getting it wrong. Or tell us what you'd like to hear in the next session. So Monique and I obviously have outlined and planned the next session, but we have plenty of wiggle room to change it up if there's something else you'd like to see in the part 2. Rob, did you want to say something? You unmuted.
I'd like to.
Go for it, Rob.
Hi, nice to see you, Elizabeth. Dr. Alexander, how are you? It's Rob Gray from Department of Ed. when your candidates are going into the school student teaching, now I know the elementary ed program has a lot of field placements prior to student teaching. What is their single biggest adjustment that they have to work with when they first start? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Monique, do you want to start or do you want me to start and then add in?
It's up to you. I would say, honestly, the biggest adjustment is adjusting to the fact that you are in a school building for 8 hours, and then you will have work to do when you go home. So they spend the first 3 weeks being exceptionally exhausted. They often get their first cold of the season during that time. And so making the transition to being a student to being a professional and a student at the same time, just the general time is really exhausting for them. And also thinking about the brain power that it takes to build community with people who you don't know, finding ways to fit in, looking for resources. All of it is so cognitively exhausting for them the first 3 or 4 weeks of
Yeah, I could not agree more, Mo. I think that's really typical of what our students also experience over at UD. Adding to that and expanding on what Monique said about the sense of belonging, everyone on this call is an educator. So everyone probably took at some point some class where you heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the sense of belonging. And it cannot be overstated how that sense of belonging that our candidates had, that they are invited to be in this space, that they're wanted in this space, and that they have expertise to share immediately, and that they don't have to stand back and observe. As you all know, we moved our UD program a long time ago away from a gradual release model to a co-teaching model where our candidates are active on day one. So to have teachers who are excited to have our candidates in the building, see them as an extra additional human resource in the room to support pupil learning. Don't see it as like a drag on their time and energy, but see it as a real collaborative partner. Our candidates will shine. A candidate who comes in and feels that they're kind of a second-class citizen, they're just not going to have the opportunity or the internal fortitude to say, wait a minute, I do know stuff. I have an excellent 4-year degree behind me. Here's some ideas. Does that answer your question, Rob?
It really does. And in terms of the 3 areas you highlighted, it makes total sense, to have them in. And thank you for reminding me that you moved away from the gradual release model. So that makes what you're focusing on even that much more important. Appreciate it. Great presentation. Thank you.
It's good to see you. Rob and I used to work together at DCTE, the Delaware Center for Teacher Education.
Yep.
Any other questions? Or things you'd like to see in part 2? I just want to give a shout out to Stacy. It's so nice to put a face with a name. we communicate quite a bit behind the scenes via email, so it's lovely to see you.
I know it's nice with Zoom now. I get to see people that I've only known through names. So nice to see you.
Well, on behalf of DAZZLE, Delaware Academy for School Leadership, I want to thank everybody for attending today. We really appreciate it. And we do hope that I think many of you registered for session 2, but if not, Elizabeth did put the link for the next session, and I'll try to remember to send out some reminders along the way. I know it's helpful to have that link sent out right before the presentation, so you're not scrambling and looking for it. In the meantime, if you have any questions, and also we recorded this, so we will be posting the recording, as I said at the beginning, on the DAZZLE website and sending it out to you. So if you want to share it with anyone, you can do that, with some of your other staff. Is there anything else, Elizabeth and Monique? Any other questions from the participants?
Tell your friends about our book.
Yes, and we put the link for the book in the chat, so that's in there as well.
Yeah.
So
If you joined late, I'm going to repost the link for the book purchase. It's actually
okay,
the audience for the book is anyone who works with a teacher candidate. So it's good for principals, it's good for classroom teachers, and a lot of what's in this book is translatable to mentor teachers who coach other in-service teachers. And it's a really accessible, like the way Monique and I are talking, like down to earth and normal. There's not a lot of jargon. It's not super, you know, I don't know, researchy. It's research-based. You'll see a ton of citations. But it's really an easy to use, friendly guide with templates, reproducibles, activities, all kinds of things. So get your copy today.
You're so good at that spiel.
All right.
If we don't have any other questions, we can just thank everyone for attending today and hope we see everyone for the next session on June 17th at 11 o'clock. And if you haven't registered, please register. And any other questions before we close today? Well, I guess you ladies answered all the questions in your presentations. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.